All right, congratulations for starting the next video, which means you survived long division. And now what we do is we get rid of long division, and we're going to learn that there's a shortcut to long division called synthetic division. And I know a lot of you are thinking, well, then why learn long division? Because long division is the root. If you ever want to look to see if something's falling apart, it's another way of doing the, well, it's a better way of doing the division where everything's really clear versus this kind of one where it does work, but it uses some, like, I'm hesitant to use the word cheats, but it is a little bit of a cheat, and there's a way, there's easy ways of messing it up. So if you ever want to double check that your division is okay, you go to long division. But we are going to be using synthetic division going forwards because it's just so much quicker. So going through the process, step one is to set up the question. Now, to set up a synthetic division, what you're going to do is you're going to set the divisor equal to 0, and that's the number that's going to go in your divisor or your division box. So if you look at this question, we're going to use synthetic division to find the quotient and the remainder, and we're going to take this dividend and divide it by this divisor. So to find the number that's going to go in the box, it's like finding your 0. X minus 2 equals 0 and x equals 2, and that's the number that goes up here. Then you're going to take the coefficients off of your dividend and write them here. And the most important thing here is that you got to make sure they're in descending orders of power. With long division, there'd be a catch. If we'd forgotten to do that, you'd be like, oh, where's my matching term? Whereas this, you'll do the whole process and maybe notice you've made a mistake, but maybe not. So we're going to pull off the coefficients. We've got a 2, and then a -5, and then a 3, and then a 7. And then we're going to begin the process. The process for this one is bring down, multiply, add, repeat. And what you're going to be repeating is multiply, add, multiply, add. So there's a little bit of similarities to long division because it is a shortcut of long division. The biggest thing that I want to point out is that with long division you subtract, and with synthetic division you add. And the reason for that is that we're switching the sign on this. But let's just do the process. So step number 2, which is the step number 1 of the actual synthetic division, is to bring down the first term in your dividend. Okay, then you're going to multiply the divisor by that first term, and then you're going to write the answer up here. And then you're going to add these two together and get -1, and then you get to repeat that process. So 2 times -1 is -2, and then you're going to add. 3 plus -2 is 1, and then you're going to multiply, and then you're going to add. And then what I always do is I put a box around this last number. This last number is always your remainder. And just like with long division, you can check your remainder by plugging 2 in for x in this equation, right? So if I plug this in, I would have 2 times 2 cubed. I was trying to find my cube button. Minus 5 times 2 squared plus 3 times 2 plus 7, and I get 9. So it's a great way of checking, even if you're doing synthetic division, that you're doing okay. And then the next thing you do is you're going to rewrite these as coefficients on your quotient. So this part is my quotient and this part is my remainder. Now the important thing to recognize is that when you're dividing a cubic function by a linear function, the degree on the first term in your quotient is going to be 1 less. So it's going to be x squared, right? So if you divide cubic by linear, it's going to take your quotient down to quadratic. So the coefficients, this one's going to be on x squared, this one's going to be on x, and this is going to be your constant. So your quotient is 2x squared minus 1x plus 1. And then if you needed to, you could say whether, the divisor was a factor, yes or no. For this one, it would be no. You could also write your division statements. And that's synthetic division. It's kind of lovely. So the reason I teach writing your quotient like that is because I want you to recognize and I'll say it again, when you divide a cubic by a linear, it's going to take your quotient down to a squared, so I go left to right. You also could start here and be like, this number next to the remainder is always a constant, and then it goes up in powers of x. So constant x, x squared, and then again, just double check that the power on x is correct, because if you ever need any ghost terms and you forget them, then that's what'll go wrong, is that your quotient won't go up to the right power, or won't start at x squared if it should. Okay, so let's try another question. So again, the first job is to set up. So you're going to make this little division box. In the division box, you're going to put the 0 of your function. So we're going to put in -3. And then I like to put a line down here for all of my sums. And then you're going to take your coefficients off of here. So this is a coefficient of 1. And then you'll notice there is no x squared term. So you're going to put in a coefficient of 0, and it's super duper important that you do that. If you don't, I can show you what happens, but really I can just tell you is that when you go to write your quotient, there won't be enough terms. It won't go all the way up to x squared, or you won't go all the way down to a constant. Okay, so now that we've set up our synthetic division question, we're going to bring down the first term, and then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add, and then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add, and then we're going to multiply, and then lastly we're going to add. And then as always, I put a box around this last number because this is going to be my remainder. So my remainder for this one is 0, and then I'm going to write my quotient. Again, I'm doing a cubic by a linear, so my first power is going to be an x squared, then an x, and then a constant. So I have 1x squared minus 3x plus 7. All right, and again, you could state that yes, this is a factor, right? X plus 3 is a factor of this cubic function, or you could write a division statement but using synthetic division. So what we're going to do is just another question where we're actually going to do just that. So it says, using synthetic division, determine whether the number is a 0 of the polynomial function. Now again, this is now a third way of doing this. We could just plug -1 in for x and we would get the remainder, and if it's 0, it's a function, it's a factor. We could do long division, although we'd have to do this as x plus 1 as the factor, or what we're going to do now is synthetic division. So they've already done that first step for us, where they've already solved your divisor, and they're saying, hey, is -1 a 0? So we're going to put -1 in the, I'm supposed to call it the penalty box. We're going to put the number 1 in our, what do they call it? Divisor box, or anyway, whatever you want to call it, in the box. And then we're going to have this line across here, and then we're going to pull off our coefficients. So we've got -4x to the 5, 1x to the 4, 6x cubed, 2x squared. Ooh, we're missing a 0x. So I'm going to put in a 0 and then 50. Okay, and then even though this is a quintic function, the process is the same. So it's just going to be a little bit longer. So we're going to bring down, and then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add, and then we're going to multiply, and then we're going to add. Keep going. Once you reach the end of your synthetic division, for this question it asked you whether that number is a 0, and since it's 51, so since the remainder is not 0, therefore -1 is not a factor, or not a 0, I guess this one asked. Right? Another word for the exact same thing. And again, if you're nervous at all that you've messed up, you can check your remainder by using it, like plugging it in for x. We'd have -4 times -1 to the 5, so times -1, plus -1 to the 4 would be just a 1, plus 6 times -1, plus 2 times +1, because -1 squared, plus 50, and we end up with 51. So it's just always good to double check, and it is also good to know that you can do the same thing multiple ways and hopefully get the same answer. It's a way of checking to make sure you're good. And that's it. That's synthetic division. So go and practice that in your homework.